Hi. Good morning, everyone. This is Shakil from Washington, Samiti, and we are conducting these webinars. Before getting into the webinar, just I will try to give a brief description about our organization. We are like a non-profit organization. It has been started like 19 years back, thinking the objective of to maintain the heritage and the culture of our community in US, United States of America, to carry forward for our kids and as well as our families to have together. So stating that last year we started with few of the webinars, and this year also we started with webinar. As you know, like COVID situation, we were trying to work from home and staying home safe. So we conducted these webinars, and it has been received by the community very well. And thinking of the kids' growth and as well as the career, so we thought to conduct, and we collaborated with Huntington Learning Center from Bothell. With us, we have today Rebecca. She is the Senior Director of the Center of Huntington Learning Center from Bothell. I will hand over to Rebecca to continue the session. Thanks, Rebecca.
Good morning. I hope everybody has had a good start to the day. So I am going to be going over the SAT and the ACT college planning. Agenda-wise, what we're going to be taking a look at is the overview of the differences between the SAT and the ACT. As a state on the West Coast, most of us are familiar with the SAT. It is what is hosted inside of the high schools. ACT tends to be more of the East Coast. However, all colleges accept either test and they are considered to be equal value. So we're going to be going over the pros and cons, the differences. Every child is going to respond differently to both tests. So the idea is to find out which one is going to be best suited for your child. When to take these tests. The big question I get from a lot of people is how early do I start and how late is too late? So for my parents' generation, they didn't have to start studying until their senior year. However, I get some families that are in a very proactive seat and they will start studying the freshman year. So we're going to just take a look at what timeline might be best appropriate for you guys. How the colleges use them is a really big conversation that has especially risen to the surface in 2021 during COVID with the test optional conversation. So we'll be taking a look into that and what those options are if you choose to not pursue the SAT and ACT. And then we'll go over some of the frequently asked questions that I get that don't fit nicely into any one of these categories. I will be opening it up at the end for any questions or clarification, anything that I do not explain in depth. Please keep your questions until that point in time, and then we'll open it up at that time. All right, so overview of these two tests. The big difference between the two tests is going to be your format. What you're really going to find is that the test sections are going to be relatively similar in regards to the level of content they are studying, meaning the reading will both be calibrated to the 10th grade reading level, and you will see that both on the SAT and the ACT. The writing section in SAT will be similar, if not identical, to the English section in ACT. Those two sections right there are the most heavily common overlapped. Now, the trick with those is that although they are still going to test on a high school level, your editing and your grammar skills, those ones are not necessarily reinforced academically in Washington State beyond 6th grade. The math is generally going to go through Algebra 2, SAT and ACT, that is true. The only exception is that SAT will have about 5-ish problems that might start to stretch up into the direction of what would be considered pre-calculus. Depending on your guys' background in math, you'll know that pre-calculus is more of an American thing. So depending on how you look at that, you're going to look at it and you're going to be like, okay, well, this is still Algebra 2 trig. The major difference in regards to the sections is going to be the science section. Now, science section does appear on ACT, but I do want to really emphasize for people who are thinking, oh, I really love science, so I'm going to lean into ACT, or I hate science, so I'm going to avoid ACT. The science section in ACT is not a real science section. Meaning, if you guys have taken chemistry and you think, okay, well, it's going to test me on balancing a formula. That is not what it's going to do. It's not going to see if you guys actually paid attention and mastered chemistry. What it is going to do is it's going to show you an experiment, and it is going to ask you to read through the experiment, and then it will ask you questions about what you understand based off the charts and graphs and the analysis of your reading. So in a lot of cases, we tell the kids, don't think about it like a science section. Think about it like another reading section. And if you do that, that will kind of foreshadow your strength. If you're a strong reader, science goes well. If you are not a strong reader, science is going to prove to be challenging. So those are the two differences. Depending on the generation that you talk to, it used to be that the ACT was preferred from STEM schools. The SAT was preferred from more of the liberal arts schools. Again, though, that is no longer the case. It's just that a school will ask for a certain percentage of accuracy, and that is what they expect you to score on these tests, and they will take them evenly. And it is because they are two competing companies. They constantly evolve the test against each other, and through that evolution of the test, they've basically become, you know, 6 one way, half a dozen the other. All right, so math level again, SAT is going to go through your Algebra 2, and it's going to stretch up a little bit higher into the trig. ACT is going to be that arithmetic through Algebra 2 trig. The timing. Timing is the major difference between the SATs and ACTs. When people reach out to us and they say, okay, should we be taking the SAT? Should we be taking the ACT? We want to study and we want to get the best scores for these tests. We always recommend that everybody takes one SAT and one ACT from a raw data standpoint, meaning you have not tried to study significantly for one or the other, because then you're comparing apples and oranges. It's better with no studying to take both a diagnostic version of an SAT and an ACT and then compare them. Now, SAT, the thing to know about that is that that is going to be a more complex question type, meaning that most questions are going to be a two-step solve, but they're going to give you about a minute per question. So what we generally hear from students when they take an SAT for the first time is, you know what, I finished on time, so I feel pretty good. And then they get their scores and they're like, that section did not go as well as I thought it was going to go. Because sometimes we see students use time as an indicator of their success. And so that can be very deceiving in SAT. So you have to be very aware that time cannot be your indicator of success. It has to be, did you see both parts of the question accurately? ACT is more of a black and white test. Only one step solve, you either know it or you don't. But because they are so straightforward, it is a relatively high timed pressure environment, meaning you get about 30 seconds per question to answer. So if you're the type of kid where you get underneath the gun and you're like, I blinked out because I'm starting to feel the stress of this and I'm starting to panic and I can't remember any answers, ACT might not be your test. But if you do really well in I see this question, I know how to answer it, I'm going to answer it and move on, or I see this question, I have no idea, I'm going to move on, that test is going to be more complementary to your testing style. The essays. Now the essays are no longer going to be offered an SAT. So when you guys sign up for an SAT, you will not see an option to sign up for writing any longer. ACT is still offering an optional writing section. You are not going to see most of the major colleges request it. It's been a long, long time since I've seen a public school request that. However, a lot of the private schools, if you guys are looking at private schools, are going to still be requesting the essay if it is available. So that's something to look at if private schools, or we have also frequently seen it from any military schools. So like West Point is going to ask for it.
No, real science paragraphs.
Okay, got it. All right. Question types. The question types for SAT and ACT in regards to the presentation format are going to vary a little bit. SAT is going to be a mix of multiple choice and fill in the blanks. ACT will be all multiple choice. The scaled score for SAT is going to be a 400 to a 1600, 1600 being a perfect score. What we are currently seeing as the national average is about a 1080. ACT, it is 1 through 36, 36 being the perfect score, and what we are seeing as the national average is a 21. Now, when I say national average, that is not typically what Washington students get. That is, tend to be a little bit higher, but that's going to be something to keep in mind that we typically see from somebody who has completed Algebra 2 and has not studied from either test. So if you have not studied and you have taken Algebra 2, then that is going to be the score that you should be expecting to see. All right, we're going to move on to the next one from here. All right, so I wanted to give you guys an example of what we have in regards to SAT and ACT so you can see the differences when we talk about this. On the left-hand side, you're going to see a sample of the English portion or the writing portion. On the right-hand side, you're going to be a sample of the ACT portion. One thing that I want to point out to you guys, if you look out to the left-hand side, you are going to notice that total questions wise, you will only see 4 questions here. Again, these questions are beefed out to be more complex question types. And so you're going to see fewer questions presented per page. Where ACT, you're going to see almost double the questions presented on that side. But again, it is just going to be straightforward questions. The one down here, for example, they might be testing you in SAT both on your punctuation and on your singular versus plurals. If you look up here in ACT, you are only being tested on the punctuation. That's it. That's like you either know how to do it or you don't kind of deal. All right. Since we have a little bit more time, my kind of pro tip for when you are taking the English and we are trying to study is going to be a couple things. Number one, the number one most question type in this section is going to be punctuation. So going back through and brushing up punctuation questions and knowing your rules on how to use those is great. If you're having a conversation and I ask you, how do you use a comma and where do you know how to place it? And you tell me it's the spot where you breathe, because that is what the kids are taught in 5th grade typically. If that is their answer, we need a higher understanding of what it is. If they tell you that a colon is used only in a list situation, we need an higher understanding of that. Yes, a colon is used in a list, but is that the way SAT and ACT are going to use them? Absolutely not. So you need to know the other purposes that those are used for. The second commonly missed question type is called execution questions, and these are your editing questions. So these are your ones on the left-hand side in SAT, that is 5 and 6. You know they're editing because they start with these word prompts, where 4 and 7 do not have word prompts. Same thing on the ACT side. 24 starts with a word prompt. 29 starts with a word prompt. So these are execution questions. Really having your students focus on how to solve those will make a huge difference in their scores. All right. SAT versus ACT reading. So samples that we have here, again, on the left-hand side, we're going to have the SAT. This is one of 3 pages that is presented for an SAT reading style. Ooh, sorry. So you're going to want to make sure that you take a look at that. The other thing SAT has done is they have added charts and graphs into their reading section. So a student does need to study and make sure that they are comfortable with looking at a variety of different charts and graphs if they are going to pursue the SAT. ACT is a little bit more straightforward. There are no charts and graphs. This is about the total amount of reading that is required per section. But again, you have a huge time difference in regards to these question types. Usually in the SAT, you're given about 12 to 13 minutes per passage. ACT, you're given, if you're going to do it perfectly, 8 minutes, 30 seconds. So we typically train the kids on a 9-minute timer. But those like difference of 3 to 4 minutes inside those sections, huge for how that impacts the kids. All right. The math side, on the left-hand side, you're going to have the SAT math. Again, they do a good job of trying to incorporate a lot of graphs and charts into the ACT or SAT as a whole. You are going to have fewer question types presented to you, where ACT is going to be, you know, a little bit more compact, and it's just going to be a little bit more, do you know this question? Do you not? The other thing to know about the math section is going to be that there is a no calculator math section, meaning a student does need to be pretty strong with their basic operations and operating without a calculator. The last thing to know about SAT math and why the major differences is that it is the section that is a mix of multiple choice and fill in the blank. So if you're the type of student that cannot solve the problem and get to the correct answer naturally, you're the type of kiddo that does a little bit better about reverse engineering, like I have 4 options, I'm close, or I think this is the answer and I can see how they got there, you're going to be in a disadvantaged spot on SAT. You have to be a strong math student to be very successful in SAT math. So that's kind of the thing we see there. The good news is that we see students study more successfully for SAT math than we do for the English portion. The English portion is easier to increase on ACT than it is SAT. And that is reverse on the ACT, where the math is a little bit harder to study for. Other things in regards to ACT math that to be aware of, although it is all multiple choice, and that is a good advantage, you get to keep your calculator the entire time, it does move from easy to hard. So questions 1 through 30 on the ACT are easy level, 31 through 45 are medium, and 46 through 60 are going to be hard. So it's just going to depend on how you respond and how strong you are with the math to figure out which section is going to be better. And then on the right-hand side of this slide is going to be the ACT science, just so that you guys get a good idea of what I mean when I say it's not real science in regards to the fact that it's testing you on your science knowledge. It is looking at an experiment supported by charts and graphs, and then you are having to say what you understand from that reading based off that data that is presented to you. Okay, timelines. SAT and ACT, the best time to prepare for them, regardless of a student's age, is going to be after they take Algebra 2 Trig. If you wait to go further into a student's education based off of their age, what typically happens is a student's score starts to decline. And the reason is that once a student proceeds past, into pre-calculus and into calculus, they are no longer working on math that is relevant to this test. They are starting to work on math that is relevant to college and to the future of their careers. And so that is something that we always encourage the parents to do, is to operate or to execute or take advantage of that Algebra 2 material being right at the surface of their mind. So wherever that is inside of a student's career, that's going to be the best time to take these tests. Now, that being said, the SAT is going to be administered usually, as a rule of thumb, every other month. There are some months that they skip, but you basically can say every other month we can count on a test being available. There are certain dates that are very difficult for a student to prepare for. So we right now are sitting in November, so there's a November one. December, I'm going to come back to that, is a good test to take, but March tends to be very difficult for students to successfully study for, depending on your kiddo. The reason, or I beg your pardon, May is that one. The reason we say that is because it's going to be right before or clashing with AP finals. So if your kid is taking AP finals in May, that is going to be a really, really tough test to study for. Same thing in June. If you're not an AP and you're just taking the standard courses, the June test is really hard to study for because you're going to have normal finals occurring there. So the test dates we generally recommend you do study for is going to be March, because it gets away from January's finals and is before May's AP finals. August, because you have all summer to study for it. and October, because you, again, have all summer to study for it, and you're only about 6 weeks into school at that point. So it's before school really starts to ramp up. So those are the 3 idealistic dates that we find that students best prepare for. Again, November and May tend to be very, very tricky. So those ones we usually encourage the kids to avoid. December and June is a coin toss. It depends where you guys are as a family. So December and June can be very difficult to study for. But the difference of those, and the reason that we have those in the lineup, is because these tests are graded on curves, and the December and the June test dates are the easiest curves to go against. So when I have a kiddo who says, I want a perfect score, there's certain ranges or certain tests that's very difficult to ask for. October, everybody studies for October. So for you, and everybody studies for August. So for you to be above the curve is incredibly difficult. But December and June, a lot of people feel really stressed. Like in December, you have midterms, you've got holidays. And so the kids are usually pretty stretched, pretty thin. Plus, I can say from my standpoint, I've been doing this 10 years, a lot of kids are not super motivated to want to be studying during the holiday season, even if they're not stressed. And so what you see is you see a lot more kids miss questions in December and June than they typically would. And that will play in your favor as the curve goes. So we always tell our kids that want to have the perfect scores, you have to face the fire in a way, and you have to take December or the June test. ACTs are going to follow a similar lineup. So every other month. September is the best one to study for because you have all summer and it's usually in the second week of school. April is a great one to study for because it's after first semester finals and it's before APs. October, February, and July, a little more challenging. December and June, same thing with the finals. The curves against those tests, when I train a kid to go for a perfect score, you know, we're taking them in other months, but they are gunning for that perfect score in either the December or the June test. Okay. Other things to keep in mind, you guys, if you are going to take advantage of early action or early decision in your senior year, that occurs, the application process occurs in October of your senior year. So you need to be done testing basically in your junior year or 11th grade, and you will have the opportunity to take one more test right there in September or early October for SAT. After that, applications are due and your senior year is no longer going to be a viable time to test. Where to register. So once you find out which test is better for you, whether it is the SAT or the ACT, because they are competing companies, you guys are going to have different websites you will want to sign up on. SAT is located on College Board. ACT is on ACT.org. Now, during COVID, we have found that the private facilities are a little bit safer. So finding private schools has decreased the probability that you will be canceled on. That also being said, you know, since school has started, we saw maybe one more wave of kids being canceled on, and for the most part, it has stabilized in the situation, so you should be good to go. The recommendation then is just to make sure you sign up in advance, meaning that you're looking at this about 3 to 4 months before your test, because this area, I'm sure you guys know from sitting in traffic, is really crowded. There are a lot of kids here. So that means that the facilities will fill up quickly. And if you wait until like a month before this test, you are most likely going to only be left with options which will have you driving. Now these tests occur at 8 in the morning. So if you're driving down to Olympia, like most people just go spend the night in Olympia, but I've had kids leave the state because they can't find a spot in the state. I've had kids drive over to Ellensburg, up to Friday Harbor, spend the night out on the islands. It's not a great idea to wait until last minute to sign up for these tests. The frequency of taking the test. So minimum, you need to take this once unless you're going to go the test optional route. And we are going to talk about that. The standard time amount of times is 2 to 3 times. Most people will take this test 2 or 3 times. Maximum, there is no limit. These companies are companies. They'll take your money as much as you're willing to give them your money. But there is a certain way that you want to present the information if you guys are going to go this route. And this is the score select versus publish score. So what that means is you're going to see SAT and ACT volunteer as a complimentary service to send your scores out. You will usually see this when you sign up, and they will confirm it when the student goes in on test day. If you do that route, you are publishing your scores. And so what that means is that the college can see how many times you take this test, and they're going to see all of your scores every single time, and you're going to ding admissions office. So if you pick like UW and you take this test 5 times, well, now UW has seen that you've taken SAT 5 times and how you've done on all 5 of those times. So they really don't like to receive more than 3 scores, or it starts to become what they consider a nuisance. But it is a complimentary service. So if you are in a position where the calendar has got away from you, you're looking at the end of your junior year and the beginning of the senior year, and you only have 3 test options left, well, you might as well take advantage of the complimentary service. If you can, we encourage our families to do what is called score select. And what that means is that you hold those scores privately in your account. So you do not publish, you do not send them out. They get the scores get reported to the student's account, which is private until you guys pay to publish. Now, what that means is that you usually have to pay a fee on the back end, and it ends up being like $20 or $30 per school, but you pay a fee on the back end to say, I want to publish these scores and I want to send this test and this test off to the schools. And what that means is a student could take it 15 times, and the colleges are not going to know. They are only going to see the ones that you publish. The other advantage of that is that all schools, or most schools, 90% of them, are going to be working on what is called super scoring, meaning that you can take this test multiple times and take the best sections from different tests to create a master score. And so that is when we get a lot of kids that apply with perfect scores. That's typically how perfect scores are created. So for example, this year we have trained a lot of kids, like and we're in the hundreds right now. I've had kids studying for months and months, and I've seen 2 perfect scores naturally, but I've seen a multitude of perfect scores come from students studying and taking this test multiple times and focusing and then creating that perfect score over a multitude of different tests. So that's how that's handled. But you do need to be aware that it is the more expensive route, but you're paying for basically privacy and can control or the flow of information. All right, so how the colleges use these tests. So the colleges use these tests as the common measuring tool across the nation. So I do get a lot of parents that come in and they're like, we're not worried about it. We've got a strong GPA. We've got a 3.9 GPA. And that's great. But one thing to understand is if I take a Washington kid with a 3.9 GPA and I compare them against a Nebraska kid with a 3.9 GPA, those 2 academic journeys and the depth of education are going to look different. And so the only way that a school, for example, in Florida, is really going to know the difference between that Washington kid and that Nebraska kid is the SATs and the ACTs, because those are the only tests that is administered nationwide to address the fact that every single state has a different standard of education. And so this is why you see a lot of schools during this conversation when we talked about going test optional versus test line. That's why you saw a lot of schools go test optional and not totally get rid of it, because they do not want to be blind to the differences of this different states and the education that backs all those different kids. It also helps determine your scholarship offers. So there is literally millions of dollars to be had in scholarship offers from the SATs and ACTs. There's different ways that this works, but basically the higher score you have on an SAT or ACT, the higher probability you will be offered money to go to that school. They will financially incentivize you to go to the school if you have a strong GPA and a strong SAT and ACT score. You will look like a desirable candidate that they will want to have at their school representing them. So I get some kids, depending on the route that they want to go, they know they're going to go into higher education. So I see some kids that will max out their GPA and max out their SAT and ACT scores, go to a less competitive school, get a full ride scholarship to their first 4 years, knowing they're going to be pursuing higher education down the road, and knowing that when it comes time to pay, they'll pay for the higher education. They're not going to pay for their undergrad. But there's a lot of different ways to work that. You know, if you don't want to compromise necessarily the caliber of school you're going to, there is still ways to achieve scholarship throughout that. It also helps determine acceptance into competitive programs. So that means when we have a school like UW, where they say you have to get X to qualify for the school, that is not qualifying for computer science or nursing or engineering. That is only qualifying to get into the school. You have to get a much higher score to actually say, I want to be in UW and declare computer science. And so that's very true across the nation. And you're going to see that be true through multiple competitive programs. All right. Is your score good enough? So once you guys take the test and you receive the scores, what we recommend is that you guys go and you look at the school and you look at the acceptance rates. The acceptance rates will tell you how high your score needs to be, because that will show you where your range needs to be with your score. So I'm going to use UW as our example. So, and I'm going to use ACT because it's 1 through 36. So it's a little easier. So UW is going to advertise that they want on the ACT a 27 to a 32. That is their advertised accepting ACT range. UW's acceptance rate is 52% right now. We'll see what happens after this next year. I have a feeling it's going to drop. But right now it's standing at a 52%. That means you take your 27 to your 32 and you look down the middle of that score. And that needs to be your ACT or your SAT score that you bring to the table in order to feel comfortable. So if you guys look at SAT ranges, you know, then the middle range for SAT is a 1340. So if you have a 1340 for SAT for UW, you're in a comfortable position for application. You are not in a comfortable position for computer science, but for application, yes, you are. And that's going to be true for all of these ranges of schools. So Harvard, their advertised range, you need to be at the top. Same thing for MIT. But if I go down here to like Western or SPU in our area, they have a 90% acceptance rate. So then, yeah, if you get in their range, you're getting in their school. So the only one that's not true still, actually, now that I'm looking at it, that we need to update is Washington State University, so Wazoo. That truly has become a test blind school. So that one you do not need to have a score to get into. Test optional route. So if you go test optional and you choose not to take your SAT and ACT score, there are 2 recommendations that are really critical. Number 1, you need to have a higher GPA than what is the campus standard, meaning if UW is asking for a 3.75, you need a 3.8 minimum score, and that has to come out of your core classes. That cannot come out of your like pottery class. You also need a minimum of 3 AP courses in which you score a 4 or better on the AP test. So that's what we're looking at for those. Beg your pardon. All right. Now, other things to keep in mind as you guys are researching your colleges, there is a huge difference between test blind and test optional. And this is going to be the thing that I really would encourage everybody, aside from just taking an SAT and ACT and determining which journey is best for you guys. That's my number one thing I would love for you guys to take away from today. But the second thing is knowing the difference between a test blind school and a test optional school. Because I can't tell you how many times I've heard kids come in and be like, oh, I don't have to take SAT or ACT in order to get into UW. And that is really dangerous. So test blind is going to be if you submit your SATs and ACTs to that school, they legitimately do not care. In this state, the only school that is test blind is WSU. Across the nation, that is very far and few between that you would legitimately see a test blind school where they say, even if you take it, we do not care. You're not going to see that very often, but they do exist. The test optional has become a very, very popular verbiage that we've seen the colleges put on. The question is does it make you competitive? So the words of advice I've been giving the kids is, if you think about what test optional means, and if I put that to your classes and you want to go to UW, it is optional for you to take AP courses. But if you don't take AP courses, does that put you on track to really be college bound? Do you look like you're putting your best foot forward? Are you competitive in comparison to the peers you're going up against during college application time? And I'm going to suggest the answer is no. You need to take AP courses if you want to actually look competitive. Same thing with SAT and ACT. Again, SAT and ACT determine the types of classes you can take in your freshman year, your scholarship offers, the competitive programs. If they don't fill up all their freshman seats, will they consider people who do not have scores? Sure. If you're like super, super special and you have this mountain of qualifications that you're coming to the table with, will they consider you? Sure. But when you're in a wave of applicants and you choose to opt out of SAT and ACT, that is an easy way for them to be like, you skipped a hoop. And so are you really that competitive? We don't really know, and we don't have time to look into it. So I would suggest, I'm not going to tell anybody you can't get into the schools, but I'm going to say use it with a huge grain of salt. It's a very dangerous way to go right now. And we've only seen it in effect for 1 year. So the data on that is also is very sparse. So I would suggest to view it like an AP course. If you're college bound, you step up to AP courses. If you're college bound, you should be actually legitimately considering your SATs and ACTs. All right, frequently asked questions. PSATs are going to be, they actually just kicked off in October. You guys should be getting your scores back. PSATs will help mostly give you an idea of what the SAT feels like. So if you've taken a PSAT and you get those scores back, it might be a good idea to then go take an ACT and actually get a good understanding of where all those scores are before you start actually studying. The other thing that PSAT will open up as an opportunity is a National Merit Scholarship. Now, National Merit Scholarship is cool. It's good. It's a little bit more limited than I think what people make it out to be. So in regards to scholarship, or the way this works, you're going to take your PSATs, and then if you qualify for the top 10% of your school, you then have to go and compete against all the other schools' top 10%. And if you're in the 10% of the 10%, then you qualify for the National Merit Scholarship. It's about $1,000. More so the significance is to have that badge on your application more than the money. But it is a lot of work. And so that's something that, we just encourage the parents to kind of pick their battles with that. So you do not want to drown a GPA. If you're trying to study for a PSAT, they're not even close to being the same kind of equivalency as far as weight. The IEPs or 504s, if you have a child who has one of these tags that is qualified by the school, and if you guys do not know what these are, then these are probably not relevant to you. But if you do have your child that has an IEP or a 504, then this is definitely an important part of this conversation. This means that you guys will qualify to apply for accommodations, meaning that you get time and a half, you get double time, you can break it apart over multiple days. If it is a ESL family, in a lot of cases, you get an English dictionary. So if you've moved here in the past year and you're having a hard time adapting to the language, there's a lot of different accommodations. But the way that you are approved for those accommodations has to go through your counseling department, meaning you need to schedule an appointment with your counselor in high school, and they are the ones that vouch for you for that. If they do not request it, you will not be approved for it. So make sure that they start that process off. And then college essays, since we're talking about, college readiness, college essays generally are going to be worked on in the summer between your junior and your senior year, and then usually through September and the first couple of weeks of October. But that is when you would be working on your college essays. We have a different course to go over college essays as a whole. But my big piece of advice is just make sure that you are aware that if you are waiting until last minute to study for your SATs and ACTs, and last minute being, by my definition, after your junior year, before your senior year, if you're going to do it in that summer, be aware you're also going to be writing college essays, and advisably, you're also going to be doing college visits. So it's not great to wait until the last minute. The best time to study for the SATs and ACTs is between 10th and 11th, so that you can spend that summer between 11 and 12 writing these college essays. Okay. And then in regards to the SAT and ACT, for you guys, we normally charge $195 for our SAT, ACT, and consultation. These are full-length tests. We do offer these to you guys for $49, both test and the consultation. But we do need you guys to let us know when you want to book it, that you are part of the WATS community. So you guys can either call and book it, or you can text and book it, but make sure you guys know, we know where you're coming from. Otherwise, we will charge you $195. And that's kind of the big deal there. All right. So I am ready to take questions, if there are any that exist in here, which I don't see the chat box. Let me look at chat box. Okay, so questions being, is UW test blind or test optional? UW is test optional. And then so backing to the testing, is the test optional route recommended? No. But let's see, even if a college is test optional, is it better to have a test score? Yes, absolutely. I would highly advise, if it was my child, I would definitely say they are going to be taking a test no matter what. And then, sorry, need to. Services we offer, we can get into the consultation. I won't drag you all through a marketing endeavor, but we do train SAT, we train ACT, we train college essays, we train AP. So we've been established in this community we're going on 11 years now. And this particular branch is the 4th largest branch in the nation. So we're highly involved in our high schools, but that's something as far as what you personally need, how much you study, what our targets are, that might be better to have like an in-depth conversation one-on-one. Is it good to practice and try the PSAT before you try your SAT? Yes. So the PSAT is a really good warm-up. You guys also, if you don't want to do through our services, there's a lot of online tests that are available, to be really honest with you guys. The big thing is when you're setting up that standard, make sure that you are setting it up underneath conditions, accurate conditions, meaning you don't do it on the computer. I get a lot of kids that try to print an SAT or a PSAT or an ACT, and they do it on the computer. And that's not great training. So don't do it on the computer, print it out, make sure it's under timed conditions, and make sure you guys have an accurate scaled score from the raw points to the scaled points so that you can accurately see what's going on there. Okay. So in regards to the AP testing, I had somebody ask about the AP testing. We are going to be talking with your guys's board. I believe that's what we would call it, about setting up the AP practice tests, which we will start kicking off in January of 2022. So in the past with your guys's community, we have opened up practice days for SATs and ACTs for the kids to attend. Some kids have chose to move forward with the training. Some kids have just used that data as a starting point and then taken it home. It's whatever works best for the families. Every family is different. You all have your own lives and own timing. But what we have seen is that as a result of COVID, we have had a huge AP demand wave. It's been one of the largest AP outreach years we've ever seen. And that's because I think a lot of kids that took APs for the first time online last year got rocked when we're coming back into what is a real AP that is not watered down. So we have been aggressively working with a lot of kids in AP this year. And what we have decided to launch is that we're going to provide an AP test once a month, starting in January, going to May. So if that's something you guys would like to participate in, you are welcome to. But again, we'll be setting up the logistics and the details with the board. So please just let them know what your guys' interests are, and that will help us also design. I know right now in-house, the main leading categories are pre-calc, calculus, and physics, AP World History, and AP US History. Those are the ones that are leading. So your guys' demands would be helpful to know about that. What age and grade levels are best for taking the SAT and ACT? Again, that is going to be whenever you take Algebra 2, but if I had to pick a general one that I think generally works well for people, the summer after 10th grade is what I consider to be the golden zone. I think it gives the student enough time to academically grow, and then it's right before things start to get busy. Junior year is the hardest year in school. So doing it before that point is going to be good. Does the $49 cover the ACT, SAT, and the consultation time? Yes. And then in regards to the time commitment, the full-length SAT is about 3.5 hours. The full-length SAT is 3.5 hours. So what we would be doing is picking 2 separate appointments, one day to do SAT, one day to do ACT, and then the consultation is about an hour. And so you would schedule that afterwards, and we would put both tests side by side. We'd be asking you guys to fill out paperwork so we can see what kind of colleges you're targeting. And that helps us help you better understand which test is best. We'll help take a look at the calendar and pick which dates are going to be best based off your guys' extracurriculars and a student's academic calendar. And then, you know, if you did want to study, how much muscle you need to be put behind it. Will an SAT, a good SAT, help a low GPA? Absolutely. Again, when we're looking at how they evaluate an SAT and ACT, this is a test that measures a student's intelligence across the entire nation. So if you have a kiddo who's been a little bit more disengaged from their academic journey, a kid who has not really wanted to take a lot of APs, this is their time to step up and say, even though I haven't been doing what I need to be doing all the way this entire time, you know, the colleges understand kids grow and kids mature. And the SAT and the ACT is the time to say, as you're exiting high school, here I am, even if it means that my freshman and sophomore year, I had a hard time getting my motor rolling. Okay, so a lot of folks say that we need to have Algebra 2 done before we try the PSAT, as it has some questions. I would agree with that. I mean, you can certainly take, the whole point of a PSAT is that P stands for practice. So you can always take it, and it will always help you understand where you are in regards to the format, how the student responds to it. You know, it can help you be familiar with it. But the math is going to be tough until you are done with Algebra 2. Is the Huntington Bothell Center an SAT center? Oh, that's a good question. So the straight answer is yes. We have always had SAT. Our staff is trained on SAT. We have practice tests. We have the training program. Do I love the SAT? If you're asking me from a professional standpoint, I think the ACT is easier to study for. So the majority of our kids are ACT kids. But we do have kids go through the SAT programs, and it really depends on the kiddo. You know, there are some kids that the ACT is just not a good route for them. And so we do train them on SAT. So yes, but I always say I enroll SAT kids with caution. I want to make sure it's the best route for them. Is the SAT and ACT scores mandatory for all universities? Mandatory? No, it is optional. If you step out of it though, the question is, are you competitive and are you going to be taken seriously? And for all universities, no. There are going to be some that are going to be test blind, but if it is not a test blind, then you're going to want to consider it. Are the SATs exams are once in a month or a few dates in a month? Once a month. So if they are tested in, for example, we have December coming up, there will only be that one December date. And then you're not going to see it again until February. Okay. Right. Okay, so slightly unrelated, does Huntington Learning Center have extra learning help for complex topics such as math, subsections of science? Yes, we do. We have what we call academic coaching, we have subject tutoring, and we have foundational programs. It really is going to be up to you guys. This particular question, I would encourage you guys to text us so that I can ask you some detailed questions and get a better understanding of what you're looking for, because that's such a large range. That would take me a little while of saying hypothetical. I could give you a lot of hypotheticals. So text us this question. We'll text you back a couple detailed elements that will help me determine what you're asking me. And then I can give you an answer in regards to the breakdown and the in-depth help and the price of that. Are these practice tests and AP offered all in the Huntington centers? Yes. Now that we have moved away from, what is extreme COVID situations where we were staying online, we do offer these in-house, and I think that's really advised for a couple reasons. The number one reason is that we see from our training programs a big difference between kids that do homework at home and take a test section at home where they feel really comfortable and they have that environment, versus I set them in a sterile environment with other kids under time. The nerves in that situation are just different. And so the kids respond differently. So a lot of our kids will go through training programs and they'll start their homework and they'll do it at home. But a lot of kids end up doing their homework here on Saturday in the group, because how they're responding to that environment is just really different from how they're responding at home. The other one that I see as a little bit of extreme is a kiddo who's very, very particular about their environment. Like it's got to be dead silent. You're not going to get that on test day. So I have, some kids that were online for the majority of their program. They come in and take a practice test and they're like, I could hear the kid, behind me shuffling his papers and like flipping back and forth. And it was really distracting. That's too bad. You have that on test day. You have to get yourself conditioned to those environments. So in-house testing is available and I do recommend it. How do you know if the SAT or ACT is better? Taking both diagnostics and then putting them side by side and seeing which scores. There is a SAT scale and an ACT scale. And although they are scored differently, how those scores come out are related to your percentage correct. So if you say I want to get 80% accuracy, although SAT and ACT will reflect different numbers, you want to find what that 80% accuracy is. And then will it make a difference if you do both? No, unfortunately not. When it comes time to apply for college, if you do take both, you're like, hey, we want to take SAT, we want to take ACT, we're just going to give them both a go. Like, is that going to hurt you? Absolutely not. No, that's great. That's going to be just more cards that you have in your deck. But when it comes time to apply for college, the college is not going to care that you did both. They're just going to say, give us the one you did better on. And unfortunately, that's kind of the reality, because I get some kids that spend a ton of time studying for one test decide to switch gears and go to the other test, and all that time they've invested in one just disappears. Doesn't count, doesn't matter. That's kind of the reality. So we always advise somebody figures out which test is best for them in the beginning, and then focus on taking that and improving that score to the best of their ability. Not only for super scoring, but so that all that time you invest doesn't disappear when it comes time to apply for colleges. How many test centers are in the States? For SAT and ACT, a lot. There's a lot. I actually don't have a number, but I would say it's probably a couple hundred test centers in the state. And then are there exams in second tier cities? Absolutely. Yeah. So if you guys want to drive out to like the middle of nowhere to take a test, there are definitely a lot of schools that host, you know, they make money from hosting. So you are going to see a lot of schools step up and offer to host. If you study for the ACT, can you do well on the PSAT? Kind of. So the cross information is, I would say there's like maybe a 60 to 70% overlap in the content knowledge, but they are formatted very differently. So if you're going to study for the ACT and then put that one to bed, like you like your score, you're good. And then you're going to say, okay, well, I want to do really well on my PSAT. You legitimately need to study on the PSAT because they're formatted. So how you time yourself, how you interact with those questions, they're going to be really different. One thing that we really train in-house and we emphasize is the difference between what we call macro timing and micro timing. That is a huge element of studying for these tests. Macro timing, we define it as you have 45 minutes to do a section, you hit go, you put your head down, and you don't look up at that clock until 45 minutes is up. That is macro timing. And if you do that kind of studying, or if you interact with the test that way, the test time controls you. And so it's very difficult for students, they will grow, but it's very difficult for students to get to high scores that way. The way that you master the test and you control it, and therefore the way that you can achieve high scores is you do micro timing. And a micro timing means that you set goals for yourself to say, I need to be at this question by this time. And so that means that, and you do that, you set multiple checkpoints throughout the section so that you know on test day, am I getting nervous and am I slowing myself down and then trying to like read more than what I've been trying to practice? Or am I nervous and then did I just rush through that and make a lot of small mistakes? Or am I on time? I'm doing this good. Good job, self. You know, you got to have those. And so how you train for ACT and the timing of that test is very different from how you train for SAT. So although the content is the same, that timing will either way help you out or royally mess you up. So yes, there is overlap, but you got to be practiced in both of them all of the way. And then PSAT is just a baby version of SAT. I personally do not train any kid on a PSAT version. Anytime somebody comes to train for PSAT, they just train on a full-length SAT. There's, in my mind, no point in training PSAT and not training SAT. That's just, it seems kind of a waste of a time. Okay. Should you take both tests and send both to college? No, they won't accept both. They're just going to say, I want SAT or ACT. If you take one test in 10th grade and do really well, and one in 11th grade and you do okay, but it's not as good as the previous one, do you have to send the lower score? No, you send your best score. So these tests are good for 5 years. So whenever you take these, whatever one gives you your best score over 5 years, that is the one that you will submit. Although I would be curious if in that 11th grade one, you know, if you have any section that you do better in, you can combine them to create a master score. And then can you choose an essay score to send them from all of the ones you have taken in total? Okay, so I think you're saying, can you do the subsections? That's how I'm going to choose to interpret that question. And yes, you can do all the subsections to create a master score, and that's a score you send out to all colleges. Okay. Do colleges see PSAT scores? Yes, absolutely. You have no control over that one. That is marketing between SAT and your high schools and your colleges. And unfortunately, you have no control of flow of information on that one. That one is just one that your kids are submitted to via being in the public schools. If you figure out which test is better for you, would freshman year be a good time to find out? Yeah, absolutely. If you can get this done and said and out of the way, that is great. And I say that again, if you've taken algebra 2, but I say that because there is a lot that goes on in the college application that you need to do to look like an individual. So if you can secure a strong GPA, if you can get good AP scores and have several AP classes, if you can get a good SAT and ACT score, all of that stuff is kind of standard when you're looking at a school like UW caliber and better. Everybody takes AP courses. Everybody will have a 3.75 and better, and everybody will have a pretty strong SAT and ACT score. So at that point, you need things that make you look like an individual. And part of that is going to be your college admission essay, your school visits, your job shadowing, any volunteering that is relevant, or things like that. So if you can figure out and get the SAT and ACT done and out of the way, again, these are valid for 5 years. So make time your ally and then go from there. Okay. Also, how exactly do super scores work and how do we send out the max scores since they're not exactly sent automatically and managed through the students, I think. Okay, so 2 different ways. I'm going to answer ACT because it's a little easier. Then I'll answer SAT. ACT, basically, if you take the test 4 times, and let's say you do well on test 1 in English, test 2 in math, test 3 in reading, and test 4 in science, okay? Those are your four sections. You did well, 1 section per test. Then what happens is ACT automatically in-house edits. So ACT will pull the best sections from each test and they will hand you a super score, and that is the score that the student will say, I want to publish this score. It's 1 score, it's sent off, that's it. SAT does not edit in-house. So what SAT does is they will log all of your tests, but you have to go through and you have to say, I want test, A, and I want test E. Those are the 2 tests that I got the best scores on. I want you to send both of these tests out to UW, and then UW has to super score them together. Okay. Can we please talk on 2 things, the IEP, the 504, as well as the National Honor? I'm going to say scholarship probably, just in regards to the fellowship. Let me know if you actually meant fellowship, but actually I don't know anything about the fellowship, but I do know the National Honor. So IEP and 504. So again, those have to be published. Your counselor from school has to be the person who advocates for you to SAT or to ACT. What that means is that you guys will have to say, okay, we've created an SAT account or an ACT. You book an appointment with your counselor. The counselor will say, okay, they're going to take the December SAT. We want to apply for accommodations. And then they will give you a list of accommodations that your child will qualify for. Some kids get time and a half. Some kids get double time. Some kids get double time split over 2 days. Some kids can take it on Sunday. Some kids get a dictionary. Like there's a whole list of things that are accommodations, but your counselor will let you know which ones you qualify for, and they will advocate to SAT and ACT for you. The reason that you cannot do that is because there was massive cheating back in the day with this. So it used to be, for those of you guys that do not know what an IEP or a 504 is, an IEP or a 504 is basically an individualized education plan, meaning that is with a student who might have like ADD or ADHD, and they're not quite keeping up. So the school has said that we need to give this child, an extra resource to be able to support them in class. That is what it is. So if you guys don't have a kid that's tagged with that, This is really not part of the conversation, but if you have a kid who has the IEP or 504, this is a huge part of this conversation. I never advise somebody opts out of their IEP or 504 accommodations if you qualify for them. But what it was is back in the day, you used to have parents pay doctors to prescribe their kids, usually in their junior year or when they get to high school, and they would pay the doctors to say, okay, my kid has ADHD. So now my kid needs to have extra time for SAT and ACT, and that gives an unfair advantage to basically parents who had a lot of money paying the doctors. So SAT and ACT are highly protective of who gets these accommodations, which is why it has to go through the counselor. And it usually has to be backed by a medical diagnosis, and you have to have an IEP or 504 typically for 3 years or longer. So all of those are things, but that's going to be the way that you qualify and how you move forward with that. The National Honors Scholarship, I can't really speak to that one as much unless we're talking about the National Merit Scholarship, in which case that is, again, you have to qualify of the top 10% of your school, then you compete against the top 10% of Washington State, and then you get $1,000. So it's a lot of work. Does the universities differentiate between a select score and a super score? The select score is a super score, and so no. And no, they do not care if you give them a super score versus like your first one. That's just standard. It's the way we apply now. Okay. All right. I think I might be at the end of the questions. All right. Let me just check. Yep, I think I'm at the end of the questions. All right. Anything that I didn't cover that anybody wants to throw in there? Okay. All right, Shaquille, then I think I am good. Thank you all for your time. Please feel free to reach out to us. The best form of communication is text message. It is incredibly busy. So if you guys text us, we'll be able to actually see that and log a spot to follow up.
Yeah, so thanks Rebecca for your time, and thanks everybody for your time. And we will be sending all the details, the recorded session, the URL and everything through email and the Facebook WATS website. So you can go through that. If you have any question, do let us know. We can connect, and Rebecca at any point of time, she's available to help you always for your kids' career growth. Okay, thank you everyone. Once again, thanks Rebecca, and have a nice day and nice weekend. Thanks everyone.
You as well.
Thank you. Bye.